Solving quadratic equations. So we have been working with quadratic functions. What the difference between the quadratic equations and the quadratic functions is a matter of a function is going to have two variables. I'm very basically breaking this down. It's not exactly all the details. An equation, in our sense, we're going to be looking at one variable. So they're only going to have x's. Or only going to have t's, or whatever the letter might end up being. But you can turn any function into an equation. We were doing that when we were working with the projectile motion, and we were seeing what happened when it was at 200 feet. What happened to the ball? Where was it at? When it was at 40 feet, what was happening at the ball? That's when we were turning that function into an equation. We were seeing what was happening at a certain coordinate. So, for the most part, what we'll be looking at is what was happening when it hit the x-axis is what this is going to be similar to. There's going to be a few times where it's not, and I'll show you what those look like. So let's take this first one. 10x minus 24 equals x squared. First, identify where your variable squareds are, or if there's just one. In this case, we only have one. Is it on the right-hand or left-hand side of the equation?
Right.
It's on the right-hand side. Move it to where all your terms are on the same side as your variable squared. Or to where the bigger of your variable squareds are. So if one is a 3x squared and one of them is a 2x squared, move everything to the 3x squared side. It makes it easier for factoring. So, if I want everybody joining the x squared, what do I need to move? So I need to move the 10x, and to move it, I need to subtract 10x. It cannot combine in with the x squared. What else needs to be moved? The negative 24, and it needs to be moved by adding it to both sides. So that gives us what? X squared minus 10x plus 24. On the left-hand side, everything canceled out, giving us just a 0. So that's the equivalent of me taking in the calculator, putting x squared minus 10x plus 24 in one equation block, and the next one putting y equals 0, finding out where they're intersecting. And for us to solve this by hand, we're going to learn today what is factoring method. And we've already been doing this. This is exactly what you did on the Angry Birds when you're working on the group project on those first the first 3 questions on each one, where you're looking at the launch of the land. And so we're going to take this expression and we're going to factor it. I recommend using that box. It seems to be working the best way for most of y'all. And so what went in the upper left-hand corner? What went in the bottom right-hand corner? What was the product we were seeking? We're trying to seek where it combines to give us that negative 10x, but the product is what that we used? 24x squared. What two things will multiply to give me 24x squared that when I combine them with addition are going to give me negative 10x? 6 and what? 6 and 4. 6x and 4x. That would give me a positive 10x. So make them both negative. And that would give me the negative 10x. So we have negative 6x and a negative 4x. Does it matter which spot I put those in? No. If you don't put it in my spot, then when I'm talking rows and columns, it'll be confusing. But other than that, when you're working on these on your own, put on whichever spot as long as they're in that diagonal. So if you want to follow along with me exactly as I'm doing it, make sure they're in this order. So that first row, what can factor out of both those terms? They both have an x, so an x can factor out. Oops, sorry. So in the next row, what can factor out? A 6, and it's negative y. Because the first term is negative. Or if it's on the height, it'd be the top term. And so one of my parentheses is x minus 6. Let's find the other one. And so first column for me, what is the same between the two? An x, is there any numbers? No. Second column, what's the same between the two? A 4, and it's negative y? Because the top term is negative. Because the top term is negative. And so when we're looking at these factors, I need to figure out how to solve what x would make this true. So there are two terms being represented here. Term 1 and term 2. There's two things being multiplied to give me 0. If I'm multiplying to create a 0, what does one of the terms have to be? 0. Only way to get a 0 as a product is if one of the terms is 0. So we're going to look and see when would make each of those terms 0. Because it's either going to be one or the other as our solution. And so I'm going to start by setting x minus 6 equal to 0. And solving that equation. So how would I solve that equation? And so x equals 6. Then I'm going to take the other equation. Because it could either be there or when x minus 4 equals 0. We don't know if it's which one of those two it is. It's one or the other. And so to solve that equation, I would need to add 4. And so x equals 4. So it's not true? They're both of them going to make it true. And so the way the computer is going to want you, and the way you respond for your answers, is you say x equals, then you put the x values in order from least to greatest. So what's my smallest, 4 or 6? 4. Comma, and then 6. That's your answer. It's not in parentheses. It's just a listing of your x values. We're going to do 2 more. Let's do this one. Which side do I want everything on? The left, because that's where my x squared will be positive. So that means I need to move the 6 to the left. Can the 6 combine with any of the terms that are already there? So that means I'm going to have it 2x squared plus 11x minus 6. I know it can't combine because a 6 doesn't have a variable and the other two do. So now I'm going to use my box and I'm going to fill into my box. What is going to go in my upper right-hand corner? Or my upper left-hand corner, excuse me. 2x squared. What's going to go in my bottom left-hand corner? What is their product going to be? 2x squared. Negative 12. Oh, yeah. Our goal is to get a sum of the product term, what's being multiplied to get that 12x, negative 12x squared to be a positive 11x. What two things can I multiply to give me 12? 12 and negative 1. 12 and negative 1. Does it matter which spot I put those two?
No.
As long as they're in the diagonal that is left, you can put them either way. So in my first row, what number divides into both those two terms? 2 and 12. What number divides in both 2 and 12? 2. Is there an x in both terms?
Yes.
In the next row, what number divides into both 1 and 6? And
Negative 1.
it needs to be negative 1 because of why?
Because the first one's negative.
The first one's negative. First column. What divides into both those two terms?
1x.
Just a 1 and then the x. Is it positive or negative? Positive. Looking at the next one. What divides into 12 and 6?
6.
That's positive because that 12 is positive. The farthest away is positive. And so my two parentheses, 2x minus 1 and x plus 6 equals 0. So that means either the 2x minus 1 is 0 or the x plus 6 is 0. So let's find out when that would be the case. And so when it's 2x minus 1, what do I do first to solve that? Move the 1. And that gives me 2x equals positive 1. What do I do next? So x equals 1/2. Now, what if the computer asked you to put it into decimal form? What would you do? It'd be 0.5. So if the computer says to round to the nearest round it to 2 decimal places, that means it wants you to convert it to 0.5. If it says nothing, it wants you to leave it in fraction form. Does everybody follow along? And then that's the directions right underneath where you put your answer blank. So on the other one, subtract 6. X equals negative 6. And so let's say I want it in decimal form. What would be my answer? X equals negative 6, comma, 0.5. If the computer asked me to leave it in fraction form, what would my answer be? And 1/2. So that's all that's different. Just make sure you follow the directions of what it wants. So it'd either be one or the other. So one special type, and this is going to seem like it's going to be harder, but it's really not much more difficult than what we already had. We're solving the system. So when we're solving systems of equations, what are some methods we had to solve it? We could use what? Substitution, elimination, and graphically. So in this one, it's set up easily to go ahead and use substitution because they're both set equal to a variable. They're both set equal to y. So when they're both set equal to the same thing, we can just set the other side equal to each other. So this equals this. Which one do you want to put on which side? Okay. You want to put the left one on the right, I heard? Oh, you said left, and I thought I heard someone else. Okay. So we'll just do that. X squared minus 2 equals 3x squared minus 8x minus 2. Which side do I want to move all my terms to? Left hand or right?
Right.
Why?
Because that's the biggest x squared.
Because it's the biggest x squared. All by moving it to with the biggest x squared, it's just making it to where you're not having problems later on. Make sure to line up under like terms. So this term cancels, this term cancels, this term cancels. So what would my left-hand side look like?
2x squared minus 8x. Minus 8x.
Left-hand side would be
Oh.
0. Right-hand side, you were saying it, what was it?
2x squared minus 8x.
So do I have 3 terms in this case?
No.
You don't have to use the box, you could. To use the box, you would have to think about this as a 0. But that's making it harder than it needs to be. Can we factor out a common term?
Yes.
What common term can I factor out?
2x.
A 2x, because they're both divisible by 2, and they're both divisible by, they both have an x in them. So 2x squared divided by 2x is negative 8 divided by, or negative 8x divided by 2x is
4.
negative 4. Now I'm down to my factors. And so I just set each factor equal to 0. And so let's take this first one. 2x equals 0, or x minus 4 equals 0. And you solve each of those one at a time. And so to solve 2x equals 0, what do I need to do to both sides?
Pi by 2.
X equals.
0.
On the other one, what do I need to do to both sides? What?
Plus 4.
And so x equals.
4.
Okay. So this gives me my x values. So my x values are 0, 4. What if it asks me for the solutions in ordered pairs? What that means is I need to find out the y value for each of those x values. And so you plug it in. Which one would be the easiest to plug into? The first one. So let's do it together, and we're going to do it just orally. So 0 squared minus 2. Negative 2. And the other one, 4 squared minus 2. So 14. Because 4 squared is 16, minus 2, 14. So if it asks for the solutions in order pairs, that's what it's asking for. If it's asking for the x values, that's what it's asking for. So read the question, see what it's looking for in the solution. Or it may ask it, what are the x values? And then what are the corresponding y values? So it may ask it in 2 parts. I can't remember how it's set up. That's all the different ways it could be looking for.